Howdy folks, Old Man Boss here, and I'd like to introduce y'all to a new segment called Smart People Read Books. Now today we're going to talk about an old book that many of you think's not relevant, something you skipped over in middle school. That book is Henry Ford's Autobiography. I'm going to share with you a couple things from this old book that are highly relevant today in today's business climate. And I think you just might appreciate both the man and the Ford Motor Company just a little bit more than you did before. So here we go. First thing is, dude was a genius. That's a fact. Man was way smarter than people give him credit for, and he was thinking like a genius from the time he was a small fellow. See, he believed in efficiency over hard work. Now, social media is all about hard work over an extended period of time, spinning your wheels, as it were, screaming into the abyss when nobody's listening for a period of years. Well, Henry Ford probably wouldn't have cared too much for that kind of work, and here's why. See, he grew up in a time when farmers believed that they had something special because they carried the same bucket of water back and forth for years, decades. They'd throw out their back, they worked too hard, and they took pride in working 19, 20, 21 hours a day doing exactly that. But see, Henry Ford was thinking, even as a kid, why don't they just put in a pipe and put in a pump instead of carrying all that water back and forth? Why not do things smarter, not harder? Next point is, build your products to last, a lifetime if you can. He designed his early cars with the idea of making them last forever. Sure, it's not possible, but it's a great goal, ain't it? To try to make your product last forever. He wanted to make sure that old Ford motor cars wouldn't become obsolete, that their parts stayed interchangeable. This is something that Apple does the opposite of by design. And perhaps we're all kind of suffering for that decision, aren't we? But instead, what if you try to build things such that today's adopter doesn't feel cheated 10 years down the road? Even at the very beginning of his automobile making time, he prided himself on keeping these cars functioning and valuable in some form or another many years after they were purchased. For example, maybe once the car was no longer a car, maybe just the engine could be taken out and used as, you guessed it, a pump for farms or a way of hauling things, and many of them were. Every time he saw an old Ford doing this, he was happy because it meant that his product stayed useful. The goal was to keep it that way. Now here's another point. The idea was to make more money not by charging more per product, but to sell more products at a lower margin. That same philosophy influenced people like Sam Walton greatly. Also, in our modern era, Jeff Bezos. You might say that Henry Ford started that train of thought. Now, instead of starting with a product and then just tacking on an arbitrary markup and margin, he worked from the reverse. He started with a cost that he thought would be inclusive for customers to pay. He wanted to bring a luxury item, he wanted to take it down and make it more affordable for the average citizen. So he started with the cost in mind, and then he worked backwards, trying to figure out exactly what needed to happen to hit that cost point. It was a very, very different idea from his peers. But he did have some rules, and these rules are why I respect Henry Ford so much. One of the rules are, you never cut costs by cutting employee wages. He believed that the only way an employee would work well for you would be if they were fully taken care of in their own life. After all, if your employee is distracted by other things, they can never truly focus on your business. So cut costs relentlessly, but never at the expense of your employees' wages. The other golden rule, never cut costs at the expense of product quality. Those two things were sacred in his eyes. Keep quality up, keep employee wages up, and cut costs through efficiency wherever else possible. As you know, the Industrial Revolution gets a lot of credit for the bad things that have happened in our society. And as a former hippie, I've definitely been doing a lot of the blaming myself. But there was one great idea that Henry Ford had that we've all benefited from, and something that we take for granted in our workplace today. Now, there were limits to how progressive a fellow like that could have been when it came to race and religion and all of that, and I'm not gonna lie, a teensy bit of that is reflected in the autobiography. Still, I think that the overwhelming message is positive, and one section that really resonated with me was the idea that pretty much if anybody showed up to get a job at the Ford Motor Company, they got it. Almost nobody was turned away. He accepted former felons as employees without judgment. He accepted people who were sick or on their deathbed or who couldn't leave their house. He'd have them sort tiny screws in the hospital to be productive and collect a check where they otherwise couldn't. He also didn't say no to people who were disfigured or otherly abled. For example, if somebody was missing an arm or missing a leg, or if they were blind or deaf or dumb, he found ways to find all of these people meaningful work. And these were people that probably couldn't have collected a paycheck in any other way. So he was able to bring dignity back to a lot of people and let them provide for their family in a time where able-bodied people really had disproportionate advantages. So that was a stark contrast to everybody else and the artisan culture where somebody was an expert and they built and tooled and machined things by hand. His system of piecemealing the whole process ensured that if somebody was only fit to sort screws via mental capacity, or if they couldn't walk, that sorting screws would still be a stable income for them. So he really didn't turn anybody away from meaningful work. Likewise, he really thought about how many positions in his company required the use of eyes, required ears to do, required hands, required legs, required anything you can think of, and he sorted his employees to do the job that was best suited for their unique capabilities. There's a lot that we can learn from that attitude today. Now, you might say that Henry Ford contributed a lot to the wastefulness of gasoline and to bad fuels. Well, believe it or not, he talked with Thomas Edison at a time when many people believed that electricity was the future of all power. Even Mr. Edison himself agreed that a mixture of fuels was more likely necessary to serve the needs of all of humanity. Interesting note, neither man believed that every single thing should come from one single fuel source. Henry Ford didn't believe that fossil fuels should contribute to everything, and Thomas Edison didn't believe that electricity was even theoretically possible to do all of our electrical needs in the future. Another interesting thing about predicting the future, Henry Ford saw that corn was stored a lot and went to waste instead of being used as food when there was corn surpluses. You guessed it, he predicted using corn as fuel for cars like ethanol. All in all, man was very, very ahead of his time and saw a lot of our modern things coming well in advance. All right, we're gonna end it with another bonus quote, perhaps the best quote of the entire book. I don't know that it's been highlighted anywhere else, but man, it sure resonated with me. True for my life. He said, "The wrong inside of you spoils even the right outside of you." Now, in these days of Instagram influencers, gosh, that one holds up, don't it? Again, way ahead of his time. So he was perfect? No, he wasn't a perfect guy, but I think you'll agree that the Henry Ford Autobiography is one of the better autobiographies out there that you'll read. Highly relevant. The dude was a genius. Come on. Pick it up.